What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend, you leave the old, itchy, worn-out way, and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to Faith Undone. I thought instead of sharing the rant segment that I was prepping for, I just want to address kind of what's going on, the thing taking place right now. Many of you know the issues, you know the event that transpired, the waves that it's caused, and so Charlottesville is a city in Virginia. It's home to the University of Virginia with its core campus. It was actually designed by Thomas Jefferson himself. Really interesting place. And many of you know there were these white nationalist protesters who were accompanied by signs and hate speeches, parades. And then there were the counter protesters, some screaming equally as loud. There were the police. They're in the center. They're charged with somehow keeping the peace and again having this really difficult decision of how to allow rights to be given and yet hold off the hate that's being shot like missiles into this Charlottesville community. And then you also had the car that was used as a weapon on these different people, and it's just sad. The whole thing is sad, and it's just been painful to watch. And I, like you, have watched people go back and forth, arguing for or against this, and angry about rights being taken away, angry about the hate and the escalation that it's all caused. I've been watching, just like you. I've been watching. And the question I have, the question that's kind of been floating around my mind is, how do we find real justice now? Because the thing happened, it's ugly. We've got Trump throwing around a bunch of tweets. We've got all these people going crazy. How do we find justice? So here's the interesting thing about justice. Depending on who you are, the word actually carries with it some baggage. There's some ambiguity there. So I've got some friends that actually believe in a literal hell, and solely because they need a God that is going to exact punishment on people who have done wrong in the world. And I again find this ironic because they'll talk about this God desiring them to treat even their enemies well, and yet the same God will someday wipe out their enemies, like with eternal fire or some short-term fire that destroys everything but this small group of people who somehow manage to escape it. It's as if they're more merciful than their God. And it's as if their idea of justice is more restorative than even their God's idea, which I think causes some interesting cognitive dissonance. So here's the thing about justice. There's one model that I would argue most people accept in our culture. And depending on where you're from, you might call it the criminal model or the judicial one. Yet in the Bible, you see this largely in the Old Testament. And so this kind of justice is simply like, it's another word for punishment, basically. And I would say it's what 90% of people I see on Facebook seem to want. And it's the Trump way of navigating in the world. So this narrative essentially says mercy is actually weakness. This idea of justice. Mercy is weakness. And when you show your enemies mercy, you're being weak and lenient. You're basically being inactive. So for them who kind of buy the idea of punishment, that justice is punishment, they'll see mercy as doing nothing. You're allowing others to hurt you. It's allowing injustice to happen. It's doing nothing. And so with that understanding of mercy and justice, what you have happen is actually mercy and justice are in conflict. Because with that understanding, you can't have both. You have to choose one or the other. Do something or do nothing. And so, again, functioning this way in society, no wonder we end up in some of the places we're in. But I would say there's actually a better option. There is a justice, I think, that's far different than the typical understanding today. And so the kind of justice I'm referring to is an actual action. And we talked about this a little bit before, but it's a different kind. What you understand justice to be, making things whole again, righting wrongs, if that's how you view it, it's a different conversation. So what if mercy is not inaction, but it's a very real action of doing something powerfully good? So with this idea, an act of mercy actually becomes the means to justice. Mercy and justice can actually go hand in hand when you move away from the punishment model. So let me give you a couple examples to make this a little clear. I've been reading the book of Exodus again. Not as history or even as if these details were all literally true. I've been reading this narrative as this ancient people learning to walk in new ways. So in chapter 2 of the book of Exodus, we're told Moses kills someone. And he sees this slave driver brutally attacking one of his people. And so we would say that's unjust, that's wrong. Humans shouldn't be treated like livestock. And so Moses has a response. He seeks justice. But here's what he does to seek justice. His justice. We're told in the story that Moses murders the man, and then he hides the body. See, whenever someone goes against the wisdom tradition, whenever they say they steer knowledge or power in a destructive way, they usually end up attempting to cover up what's happened. There's a bit of shame or a bit of regret to it. So there's usually some kind of shame after the dust settles. And I think some of you probably know what I'm talking about. You finally told that coworker where you'd like her to stick that TPS report, right? You finally stepped into the argument and you set people straight. Or you punched that dude in the face. You actually punched someone. And it was an awkward punch, of course. It actually looked more like a backhand slap, but you did it. It was weird, but you did it nonetheless. And when the dust settled, at some point you woke up the next morning and you realized what you did. And you might even have cringed a little bit. And you'll notice like the red on the back of your hand. You'll say, did I really backhand that dude? Did I really tell her what to do with that TPS report? Did that happen? See, here's the thing. That kind of justice, it only leads to things having to be hidden, covered up, or faced with apology. There's actually a lot of shame in that. And the sad thing is, if they're anything like you, then you're going to get it too. Hell is going to be paid, right? There's going to be an escalation. And so Moses murders someone and he's forced to leave. He's exiled. So here's the interesting thing. Because like other great stories, Moses' character is a dynamic one. And he changes, he grows, he learns to change behaviors, adapt, evolve. And so Moses finds himself at a well. He ends up running off into the desert. And a well, it was like a very common place of meeting at that time. So at the well, there are shepherds. And again, they're the lowest of society. And then there's a woman. And I would argue they're even lower than the shepherds. And so the story goes, he goes into exile, he does the thing, there's shame. He goes there and he is at the well and he sees these shepherds and this woman. And the story goes that the woman is treated poorly. And her sheep, they're basically pushed away. They're not allowed to drink the water. And so what does Moses do now? Because before, Moses would have escalated things. He would have fought. He'd have exacted his form of justice. But Moses, like Israel, whom the writers are really attempting to show here, he's progressed. He's learning. He's not there yet, but he's learning. So notice, he doesn't retaliate with more violence. The text says he stands with her. Isn't that good? He stands with her. So maybe the best thing you can do when someone's struggling is not to come to their aid by attacking the person that's hurt them. Maybe your first response shouldn't be to go on the attack. Because we're told Moses responds by standing with her. And the idea here is simply an action of solidarity. I stand with you. So when you've been wronged by someone, the person who's been the least helpful, I would say, is the one that's posing as your friend, the one that's egging you on to stick up, stick it to the man, fight against them, get back. The ones who are prodding you to act inhumane, those are not good friends. That's not wisdom. The people who care about you, they're the ones that actually helped you. They're the ones who use their gray matter. They understand what you needed most. What was someone to stand with them, to stand with you in your anger, in your brokenness, in your frustration. Those people, what they do is they show solidarity. So, like so many people during the civil rights movement, they stood side by side and they faced terrible violence, terrible hatred. But the beauty of it is that they stood together. And notice this. The story goes that after he stands with her, he then waters the flock. He gave them life, gave them water. But again, it's symbolic. It's a different kind of water. It's a symbol. It's a metaphor for what happens after solidarity takes place. When others stand with you in your brokenness, the idea is your soul is watered back to life. And this is salvation. It's sotar, it's healing. It's not about whisking away people for some kind of rescue up to some place called heaven. It's an act of healing solidarity that brings life right now. And so Moses stands and he gives life. He waters. He brings real justice. I've got a friend who was living in LA when the Rodney King beatings happened, which again led to these riots. He's black. He was angry too. His mom told him. He told me about the night that some of the riots were taking place, and he said he was so angry, but his mom looked at him. She gave him that mom look, and she said, "Don't you dare go out there. Don't you dare take part in that." And he said, he really wanted to. Every part of him said, "I need to be out there. I need to be riding. I need to show the man, who has power. Take back power." But his mom said, there will be plenty of time, get this, there will be plenty of time for justice. And so my friend sat watching the television, angry, hateful. He was furious, annoyed. His mom is just, "Oh, you just want me to sit here and do nothing. Got it." And he's just so mad. He's thinking all these thoughts. How could the system be so blind, so corrupt? He said he sat up all night and then just finally fell asleep on the couch. And he slept. He said he slept hard. And he woke up late to the smell of bacon and eggs and toast. Mom had been cooking. And then he began to, before he opens his eyes, he heard voices in the living room, but also in the kitchen. He picked up that some of these voices were neighbors' voices. It actually, to him, it sounded like the whole neighborhood was there. And so he opens his eyes and begins to kind of navigate through all these people in his living room and also in his kitchen. And there in the kitchen, there are these people standing and sitting and laughing. They were telling stories. And they were all dressed, he said, in work clothes. There were even some brooms and paintbrushes, empty plastic bags near the door. He walked in dazed. And he asked, "What are y'all doing?" Right? And his mom's response, she said, "We were out making things right again. We were out making things right again." That morning, his mom and their neighbors, they went out and they cleaned their dirty, trashed streets, their neighborhood. Some of them, he said, painted fences early that morning. A bunch of the older ladies, they went around, just picked up litter. They were making things right. See, rather than doing nothing, they chose to do something. So rather than fighting, escalating the violence, becoming part of the mob, or even fighting against it, they chose to bring life from the death that was all around them. They stood and they watered the broken earth. And so here's the thing about justice. If you're willing to put the work in, there's a justice that can be found that will actually heal the world. There's a justice that can make all things new. And what it takes is all of us beginning to stand together in solidarity, being willing to pick up a broom and do some real world cleaning. Are you with me? So maybe in the midst of what happened there, maybe we respond differently this time. Maybe we take to the streets and we do some real world cleaning too. Everyone, blessings, and we'll talk to you next week.